afternoon, everyone. How's everybody? I'm going to leave the door open because we're expecting a few more people, but I know parking can be a challenge, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our March Hungry for History talk. If you don't know me, come on in. And feel free to sit at the table or any chairs that you find. If you don't know me, I'm Lechana Spraker. I'm the director of the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives. And this month, we're really excited to welcome Doctors Jackson and Jackson Flowers from the Willow Hill Heritage and Renaissance Center. And they're going to present celebrating 150 years of history, defining their destiny, the story of the Willow Hill School and community. Before I introduce them, I want to give you a heads up on our upcoming program next month. So for the next 3 months, April through June, we're going to have a series of talks on historic house museums. And we're going to be learning about what was the history of those sites before they were museums, how they became museums. On Friday, April 19th at noon, we're going to have Molly Carrot-Taylor from Ships of the Sea Maritime Museum to get us started. And then she's going to be followed with speakers in May and June from Flannery O'Connor Childhood Home and the Green Meldrum House. So I'll send out more information as we announce the details of those programs. But if you are not directly getting messages from me about our programs, like this was forwarded on the little cart by the table is a program survey, and there's a place for you to add your email, and I'll add you to our email list. So let's turn back to our Willow Hill program. I met Dr. Alvin Jackson and Dr. Mackenzie Jackson Flowers recently at a Georgia Southern job fair, and I was really excited to meet them because I've been following the work they've been doing over the past couple of years, and we were inspired by their funeral programs project. So it was great to connect with them in person and then find out that they were willing to come and talk with us. Very eager to learn what they're doing, and then if time allows, at the end, we'll give you an update on some of our initiatives that are kind of related to what they're doing with schools and funeral programs. So Dr. Alvin Jackson is a family practice physician at the Curtis V. Cooper Primary Health Care here in Savannah. Previously, he served as the director of the Ohio Department of Health and on the Institute of Medicine's Board on Population Health and Public Health Practice. He is the board president of the Willow Hill Heritage and Renaissance Center and board president of the Georgia African American Historic Preservation Network. Dr. Jackson was born in Portal, Georgia. He attended Willow Hill School before he became one of the first students to integrate Statesboro High School. He has spent over 40 years documenting the history of the Willow Hill School and community, and he's done extensive research on the 38 known African American cemeteries in Bulloch County. In 2016, he was a recipient of a Governor's Award for the Arts and Humanities in Georgia. He's joined by his daughter, Dr. Mackenzie Jackson Flowers. Dr. Jackson Flowers is also a physician. She specializes in obstetrics and gynecology and currently practices at the Curtis V. Cooper Women's Center and is on staff at St. Joseph's Candler Hospital. She has worked with the Georgia Moms Project, which is focused on maternal health in Georgia. She's also one of the founders of the Willow Hill Heritage and Renaissance Center and currently serves as board secretary. So I'm delighted they could take time out of that busy schedule to join us, and I'm going to turn it over to them now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it is so wonderful to see all of you who are hungry for history. As I was many, many years ago, I was raised by my grandparents. My grandfather, Solomon, was born in 1892. My grandmother, Bonnie, 1900. And in those days, old folk would sit around and talk about days gone by. And Lord knows, I just love them stories. Sometimes I would forget going out and doing some basketball just to get a little bit tidbits. So I sort of think that this whole story is in my bones because I attended the Willow Hill School. My mother, Willowies, attended the Willow Hill School. My grandmother, Bonnie, attended the Willow Hill School. And my great-grandfather was on the Board of Trustees. So as I tell everybody, the Willow Hill School is in my bones. All right, so we're going to talk about celebrating 150 years of history as Willow Hill was founded in 1874 in a turpentine shanty. Bulloch County, Georgia. Go ahead. I want to dedicate this presentation to my dear wife, Gail. I call her Dr. Gail, who left me about 7 months ago. And as I tell everybody, it's a pill too bitter to digest. I haven't swallowed yet. And she was someone who was instrumental in helping to develop this story, working as development director. She always said that in addition to fundraising, she was friend raising, and she made lots of friends. And so I do want to dedicate this to her as I miss you dearly, baby. And there's a picture of her as a baby. Our story originates in Bulloch County, Georgia. And Bulloch County is about 60 miles from here. And it is a county that has industry, agriculture industry. It was founded in 1796 and was sparsely populated up until the Civil War. And the African American population, the enslaved population, and the Caucasian population was roughly equal. Farming was a big thing at that time. Cotton really created the industry that created wealth. And in 1906, Georgia Southern University had its origin. And as you know, Georgia Southern now has a campus here and has continued to expand. It started as a mechanical and agricultural school. The Willow Hill Heritage and Renaissance Center was founded in the 1870s, just after Reconstruction, where we had formerly enslaved individuals who wanted to create education for their kids. As you know, in Georgia, in the 1829, 1830s, there were laws through the legislature that African Americans could not be taught to read and write. So when freedom came, it was a hunger, like we are hungry for history. Those individuals who had been enslaved were hunger for education. And so one of the first things that was created was the Willow Hill School in 1874. Here is a page from a booklet that these dear souls put together so many years ago. And it helped us to understand the challenges of creating this school. In a turpentine shanty on Daniel Riggs' place, and these are all my relatives, and with Georgia Ann Riggs as the first teacher, a 15-year-old, formerly enslaved individual. And some said she learned to read through the night schools that were being operated here in Savannah. So I'm going to try to make some connections between Willow Hill and things that were happening here in Savannah. Now, this is just the first page of the booklet, but what is also important, they drew designs of the various schools over the years and created a list of the teachers, and that's how we know from the beginning the teachers that taught at the Willow Hill School. Next. These are some of the founders of the school. These were formerly enslaved individuals. Ordelia Parrish, it was on their farm with her husband Daniel Riggs, these are all my relatives, that they started the school. Now Isaac Riggs, born during slavery also, it was his brother Daniel, and on the other side, on my left far over, is Georgiana Riggs, who was the first teacher, all born during the era of slavery. And education was so important to these early families, they started 3 schools in Bulloch County: Willow Hill, the Love School, and the Riggs School. They were large families. And so I want to tell a story next about Isaac Riggs, who was, as you say, born during slavery. In 1876, the Savannah Tribune found here in Savannah in 1875 as one of the first newspapers or periodical weekly about stories about African Americans. Well, the Savannah Tribune captured this story, which happened among my relatives in Bulloch County, where 6 white men called at the house of Isaac Riggs, the gentleman who was in the middle, and pulled the teacher out and took him out in the woods and beat him without mercy. What was his charge? He was teaching African Americans to read and write and provide an education. Now this, it was 1876 and not 1890, but the date, because this is one of the early editions of that paper. And you recall that soon after this paper was published, it stopped publishing because the whites who controlled the publication of this paper would no longer publish it. So it was a few years later that they could start to tell their stories. There are other stories that I have found in the Savannah Tribune, originally called the Colored Tribune, was a story about some of my other relatives in 1889, where there was a huge wedding with nearly 200 people in attendance. And they talked about who was there and what the bride and groom did, what they served. And so the Savannah Tribune has been an important leeway to telling the story about things that have happened in Bulloch County. These are all my relatives here, most of them born during the slave era. Moses Parrish, Isabel Donaldson, they donated land now originally it was on the Daniel Riggs place, but in 1895, these are all relatives, the school moved to Moses Parish in 1895 and remained there until 1954, when the equalization schools were created after the Brown versus Board of Education decision. These 2 individuals at the bottom, Dora Donaldson, I got a point, I forgot. Dora Donaldson, Isabel Donaldson, Benjamin Donaldson, those are all brothers and sisters. Benjamin Donaldson is my great-grandparent, and this is Bonnie, who I was raised with. These are her parents, and this is her mother. And so I'm so happy that they retained these pictures, because in the faces of these individuals, you know so much. Now, this picture at the bottom, Dora Donaldson, born in 1839 in Bulloch County, Georgia. You can see she's mulatto. And so she is connected to the white families, the Donaldson family in Bulloch County. And since we have been doing DNA research, we are finding more and more secrets of the past that are presenting themselves. And so she married a mulatto man, and they were very prominent people, because after slavery, everybody wanted to own land. Moses Parrish was one of the largest landowners of African Americans in Bulloch County, Georgia. Benjamin Donaldson had a store at the train stop. The Savannah, Augusta railway that came to Statesboro, and then from Statesboro went up to Emmanuel County. There was a train stop at his store called Blandspur. And it is the only train stop that I know where an African American operated a store. And I've done a lot of oral recordings where I've interviewed several white families who talked about coming to Blandspur to catch the train to go to Statesboro. It was also a very important part of the economics of that time, because cattle, watermelon, and many other things were moved out of the agricultural community and taken elsewhere. Next. Okay, now this, you saw where I showed you the Dora Donaldson, and it's so good to see some folk from Bulloch County, Georgia. Have mercy. Good to see y'all. Good to see y'all so much. And their families are connected to these family members that I'm talking about, the Riggs family. These are descendants of the Riggs. Now, this picture, remember I showed you the picture of Dora Donaldson, and I said that she was mulatto? Go back. No, next one. That one. Okay, so this Ned Love, Alfred Love, brothers, children of Dora Donaldson, who I show you was the mulatto. Now, these individuals became very prominent in the Willow Hill community. This is the oldest daughter. She was a school teacher and was married to an individual who graduated from Georgia State in 1901 and came to Bulloch County to teach. Many of these were teachers in the Bulloch County school system. This gentleman was a huge landowner, Ned Love. He married into the Riggs family, Susan Rigg, who was sister to the first teacher that taught at the Willow Hill School. So you can see this was a family thing. They were interested in education. Next. Now here is some individuals. This gentleman, born during slavery in North Carolina. He and his wife, Arenda, were born during slavery in North Carolina, but migrated to Bulloch County as part of the turpentine industry. In the 1880s, 1890s, and the early 1900s, turpentine and the naval stores were big, even here in Savannah, because the turpentine was used to seal the ships and make them water ready so that they would not leak. And so it was huge. And since Bulloch County had lots of pine trees, it was prime for turpentine. In fact, Georgia was the leading state for turpentine for a very, very long time. But these daughters married into the Parrish and Donaldson family, and the Loves family, and they became prominent in the community. Minnie Bell Caraway married into the Parrish family. You saw Moses Parrish recently. In 1924, Miss Caraway, Minnie Bell Caraway's mother, someone was coming to her farm to take some pigs because it was alleged that she owed something. And she was not having it. She took the back of a gun and knocked this person off the horse. Well, at that time, that was a kind of a taboo. So the family perceived what had happened and caught the train in the early hours of the morning in 1924 and headed for Glendale, Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's where the family lived for a long time. And then I interviewed C.J. Parrish, who lived to be 100 years old. These were his parents in Cincinnati, Ohio. And he told the story. In fact, his sister Irene was a very little girl when they left in 24. She lived to be nearly 100 years old herself. And her mother dressed her so pretty and put her on the train to go up to meet her dad. And she said, we had to sit behind that old engine with all that old smoke. And my mama put me with this beautiful white dress on. And when I got to Cincinnati, it was all black. And so, but this sort of tell you the story of what was going on at that time. It came as part of the turpentine industry next. Okay, now these are also my relatives. This is Elder Washington Hodges, who was a primitive Baptist minister. He married Eliza Riggs, who was the sister to the Riggs we talked about earlier. And Washington Hodge, born during slavery, but in the 1880s, the people in Bulloch County once a year would come to Savannah to shop. And so they would have a caravan of wagons, and they would camp at the Ogeechee River. That was the place where they would camp, because it was more than a one-day trip. So there were a lot of bandits and robbers at that time that was at these camps stealing. So Elder Washington Hodge, now this is the family folklore, heard an owl, hoo-ah, hoo-ah, and he thought it was a robber, asking, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Elder Washington Hodges, primitive Baptist minister, known both among white and black alike." So he was trying to give his status so that the robbers wouldn't take his goods because he was a man of God. And so that story has been in the family for a very long time. This is another individual I want to talk about. This is Jonas Lee. This is Sarah Ann Hodges. This is the daughter of Washington Hodges. But anyway, Jonas Lee, his father was Cow Jack Lee. He was a black cowboy. And he used to herd cattle from Statesboro to Savannah, also crossing the Ogeechee River. His father, Cow Jack, rode a horse, and Jonas rode a mule. Now, this is my grandfather Solomon I was telling you about, born in 1892. This is all of his family, had all boys and one girl. All boys and one girl. And so this here is a picture up at the Willow Hill School. This is my grandmother. She was the one that raised me. This is my mother, and this is my aunt who came to Savannah State to graduate in '55. So again, Savannah has always had a connection with Bulloch County, Georgia. Next. This is the earliest known photograph that we have of the Willow Hill School. I'm going to see if I can restore it. I have some pieces to add to that. But right here, this is Miss Lee. She was from Atlanta. The Atlanta schools like Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse, Spelman, also in addition to Georgia State, provided teachers for the Willow Hill School. Now, one of my relatives that I interviewed, she was born in 1882 and died in 1983. So I got her stories. Well, this was her teacher, Miss Lee. And so she was saying, that's my teacher, Miss Lee, from Atlanta, never white. That was how she was. Never white. And that was the language in which they gave. But anyway, these are a lot of the students. They are grandchildren of former enslaved individuals to talk about the importance of Willow Hill. Next. Okay, Willow Hill had a board of trustees, all connected back to the original founders. This gentleman here, James Garfield Hall, his grandfather was the first chairman of the board of trustees. That's his brother there. This gentleman, Troy Polk, operated a sawmill in the Willow Hill community. The Willow Hill community became a very industrious community of African Americans. They built huge homes at that time, had large farms, and they created a school, and they also made connectivity outside of the community. This is Mr. Carter, the principal. They would bring the principal in from other areas, and the principals and the teachers would stay in the homes of the individuals. Eldridge Combe married into the Parrish and Donaldson family. He was important in helping to recruit teachers. Cardell Wiggins, all of these men had an important role in making sure that the school operated. These are the women of the PTA. Their job was to house teachers, make sure that there was fundraising. There's my grandmother here as part of that. These individuals here, their parents were former enslaved individuals. They were born in the 1880s. She married Aaron Munlin, who was the African American who started the first Black Primitive Baptist Church. These are all cousins. These are first cousin, Handy Donaldson's daughter, Mariah Donaldson's daughter, as you can see it, and she married George Donaldson's son. So all of this connectivity to the community, and they were proud individuals. Here's a teacher that they bought, Ms. Rambo. This is another teacher who is the daughter of this lady here. And so the family would send their kids off education and bring them back. Next. This is a photograph from 1946. Miss Dominics at that time had come from Dorchester Academy, which was a high school where at one time many African Americans went to Dorchester when all of the education they could get in Bulloch County. Some of them came to Kyler here in Savannah as well. Next. And this in the background is the Rosenwald building. And Julius Rosenwald, a wealthy benefactor, donated money to construct these Rosenwald schools, and they were built all over the South, over 5,000 across the South. Now, bear in mind that even though it was named Rosenwald, the citizens of the community raised most of the money and did all of the sweat equity in building these buildings. Next. Okay, this is an interesting story I want to tell you about. I've heard my grandparents and many talk about this story that happened in March of 1946. And most of you know the story of Reconstruction and then Redemption. And during Reconstruction, then when you had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, African Americans were gaining positions in state houses and locally all across the country. And then we had the rise of the KKK, and then we had lynching around 1900s and above. In the 1890s, we had the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. And so that really changed the dynamics with African Americans. But there were several cases that happened at the United States Supreme Court that was overturning the white primaries, which excluded African Americans from voting. The all right decision, I think that was in the 40s, around 44, 46. And there was another decision from a gentleman in Columbus, Georgia, where they was challenging the all white primaries. So the Supreme Court ruled that all white primaries was unconstitutional. So in 1946, the people of the community of Willow Hill were meeting to make plans to vote in the 1946 primary. And when the Ku Klux Klan heard about that, they came up and burned a cross at the Willow Hill School. Not only did they burn a cross at the Willow Hill School, they burned other crosses with other prominent citizens in the community, and they left a baby casket on the porch of Garfield Hall I showed you, whose grandfather was the first chairman of the Board of Trustees. So this created some challenges, and there's a lot more to the stories, but nevertheless, the African Americans of the Willow Hill community did go to the polls to vote in Portal, Statesboro, and the Statesboro newspaper carried the story about African Americans voting for the first time since the 1890s.
Right on.
So these are the kinds of stories we have at Willow Hill that we are telling so that our children, our grandchildren know that they are so important. There's this thing called archive of silence, where the stories and the histories of African Americans are omitted from many of the textbooks. So the Willow Hill Heritage and Renaissance Center is challenging that concept and making sure that these stories are told. This is Miss Willow Hill Junior High School. At one time, Willow Hill went to the 10th grade. And these are, a lot of these, most of the folk in the community are cousins. I've had a chance to interview a lot of these individuals, and we have over 500 recordings from that community, and I traveled where many left as part of the Great Migration and went north next. This is that roof hall I showed you in that picture earlier, that the two brothers of Dora Donaldson. Here she is now teaching at the Willow Hill School. And a lot of these, this is my little mom. She went to Savannah State, and these are all of now she's 87 years old. All right, next. This is the graduating class of 46. And I want to call attention to this lady right in the center. And she was married to Toomer, I think his name is Toomer, who was president of the Carver Bank here in Savannah. Janie Toomer. That's who went to Willow Hill School, was part of the community and part of our family there as well. And so she was one of the first African-American women here to do real estate. She worked at Carver Bank and did some very wonderful things. And her husband, father or grandfather, was one of the founders of the Savannah Tribune that I told you about, that had all these stories. And her husband also served in the administration of Dwight Eisenhower. So quite a prominent family, and graduated from the Willow Hill. Next. All right, agriculture was a part of it. So these are the new farmers of America. They would have their pig projects and all related back to the original founders. This is George McCrae here. Next. This is a important picture. This is the Statesboro High and Industrial School. There was only one high school in Bulloch County for African Americans, whereas whites had several high schools around the county. All of the African Americans, once you finished elementary school, you then was bused to the Statesboro High and Industrial School. I want to call your attention to this gentleman here, Dr. Harvey Van Buren, the first black physician in Bulloch County. He was a graduate of Howard University, came in 1918 during the pandemic of 1918, built a sanitarium hospital, and was very instrumental during that time. There is Julia P. Bryant. She was a Gene supervisor. For those of you who don't know what a Gene supervisor is, it was instructors in educations in African American school. Anna Jean in 1907 left $1 million for structural education in African American schools in the South. So those teachers that went around to all those schools to make sure that there was a good curriculum. In fact, she traveled by horse and buggy originally. I have records of her doing that. She was a Gene supervisor. And these are a lot of other individuals. These are the black farmers of Bulloch County meeting at the Statesboro High and Industrial School to learn new farming techniques. Next. I want you to get some, how much time we got left? Okay. Yeah, this is John Lawton, and he was the principal at the school when I first started. He was initially an agriculture teacher, but I remember him, and I interviewed him. I have his oral recordings. But he told us a long time ago, he said, one day there's going to be integration in Bulloch County. And I know that all of you are going to be prepared when that day comes. And so he really educated us and made us aware. And so in 1965, the first year that they had integration in Bulloch County, Georgia, I was one of the students that went to the Statesboro High School. Even though I lived at Portal, I heard that Statesboro High had the best education. So at 15 years old, I got on a thumb ride to Statesboro until I was able to buy me a car the following year. I went down to Fort Pierce, Florida, and picked oranges for the summer to make money to get a car. And so I graduated from Statesboro High School, but he prepared us. He was part of the Georgia Education Association. Not only was he a local person, he was a state person. Now, at that time, I think another point I want to make aware of, there was segregation in Georgia so that if you wanted higher education as a person of color, you could not go to the University of Georgia or any other place of higher education in Georgia. The state of Georgia would pay you to go to a school like New York University, Columbia University, and they would pay all of that rather than have you to integrate a school in your own state. Wow. So many of these individuals like Mr. Lawton and a lot of the teachers that taught me when I was in school, master's degree at Columbia University, master's degree at New York University, master's degree in Philadelphia. And it's a little known story that I think we need to talk a lot more about next.
That's right.
This is the Willow Hill School. It was an equalization school. Remember in 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education decision said that we should integrate schools with speed. During the Talmadge administration, they built a lot of schools equal to white schools. They call them equalization schools. Your schools are like ours, you don't need to come to our schools. That was the thought behind that. And so this was the first equalization school next for Willow Hill. This is an integrated, it integrated in 71. So at the Willow Hill School, you see Willow Hill Elementary School. You see black and white in that school for the first time since its origin in 1874. Next. We had a summit where we brought back all the teachers we could find. And we interviewed every one of them and got their story. Let me tell you a little bit about just a few of them. This lady sitting here, Sarah Ayers Smith. This is Felicia Rashad and Debbie Allen's aunt. They mothers or sisters. She came from South Carolina, taught at Willow Hill, and then also taught at Statesboro Industrial. Sarah Conley, descendant of the school founders from the Donaldson family. Lee Bertha Wilson Love, remember those loves I showed you with the two? This is from their line. This is my little mom, she's from the Ben Donaldson line. This lady here, Annie Williams, she was at the Supreme Court with her class in 1954 when they read the Brown versus Board of Education decision. This is from way back, Moses Parrish, granddaughter she taught. All of these are somehow related. Now, there's just very few of them aren't. Only 3 of them are alive, Miss Allen, Miss Young, and Miss Marvelyn Davis. All of the rest are gone, but yet their memories rest with us through the oral recordings that we were able to do. Next. This is our little museum, the Willow Hill Harrison Renaissance Center. We purchased this, 24,000 square feet on about 10 acres. And so this is where we are housing all of the information. Next. This is our board of trustees. All of us are cousins, believe it or not, and directly of the school family. When they put the school on the auction block, I was in Ohio, and I always told the locals, if they put that on, give me a call. And I got a call one day and said it's going up for sale in less than 2 weeks. So we got on the phone, we organized descendants of the school founders, and we had 2 of them at the auction. Now, we thought we was going to get this for a little nothing since we have the deeds where our ancestors sold it for $18 in 1920. I said, well, surely they'd give it to us for 30 or 40,000. Oh, the price kept going up. We was bidding against all these people. I was called and said, oh, the price is going up, what are we going to do? I said, there is no price for our heritage. And if you get the Savannah Morning News, you'll see those 2 stories on that. No price for our heritage and whatever it takes to the school and from slavery to progress. This is my daughter, my son, and my little mom. Yeah, with some family connection. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He's a businessman. She's a physical therapist. This is the OB you met her. She was a school teacher. He owned a radio station in Florida. This is me. I was the state health director serving Governor Ted Strickland's administration. He was a development director. She's a librarian. She worked at the CNN. She's a PhD. And he's a cardiologist. So all of us came together to save our history. Next. Wow.
What did you have to pay for it?
We paid $124,000. It was $113 plus the tax. We were at $124,000. And so we was bidding against developers, and somebody going to turn it into this. But I said, I don't care where this price goes. They probably was jacking up because they knew we wanted it. Anyway. Yeah. This is one of the signs we have, the markers. This is directed by the Georgia Historical, and it shows that, it tells the history in Reconstruction, one of the first schools for African Americans in Bulloch County, the equalization, all that we talked about, and there were a lot of local schools that went into that. Next. And this is also another marker we have, telling the story of 1874, 9 years after the Civil War, these families that came together with a 15-year-old as the first teacher. So it tells that story. And it also tells about the price, because when we put this together, I wanted to make sure that they know what we paid for that. We sold it for $18. We'll have to pay next. Okay, we do a lot of enactments. This is a taste of struggle. We're going to have one on the 27th of April. I want all of you to come. You really enjoy it. We cook like they did in the olden days. Pit cooking, have some interesting things. Roast a pig, do goat, smoked chicken, fish, all of that. You will definitely enjoy. Next. And this is our book that we put together. Dr. Eric Brooks from Georgia Southern University formerly helped work with me, and I wrote the forward for that book because I told him the story. All right, next. All right, so at this time, I was running a little fast because I wanted to give my daughter some time to speak. And also, she has been a lover of history for a long time. At 13 years old, she was the first place winner in Washington, D.C. at National History Day in the junior division for the story of the Willow Hill School.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm Dr. Nkinge Jackson Flowers, and I'm hungry for history, so I'm happy to be here today. I want to share with you one of our digital projects, and that's the Willow Hill Heritage and Renaissance Center African American Funeral Program Collection. And so African American funeral program collections are a really important source of genealogical information for African Americans. In the words of Dr. Alvin Jackson, it's the one place that your history is recorded for African Americans if you're not famous. You have record of birth, death, employment, education, religious affiliation, social clubs, service, and community trends like the Great Migration. And currently, there are 5 collections available in the Digital Library of Georgia. And I hear there may be one more added soon. But the collections are the Willow Hill African American Funeral Programs Collection, the Atlanta Funeral Programs Collection, the African American Funeral Programs from the Augusta Richmond County Library, the Evans County African American Funeral Program Collection, and then the funeral programs from the Thomas County Public Library System, and that's in Thomasville, Georgia. Okay, so this was a recent article in Reflections, which is a projection from the Georgia African American Historic Preservation Network. Tamika Strong is an archivist at the Georgia Archives, and her title is African American Funeral Programs, a Gold Mine. And so that's the December 2023 article, and you can check that out. But this collection is a partnership between the Willow Hill Heritage and Renaissance Center, Georgia Southern Public History Program, the Zach Henderson Special Library Collections, and the Georgia Southern Digital Commons. The source is the private collection of Dr. Alvin Jackson, who's our board president, and he's been collecting funeral programs for over 40 years. The collection focuses on African Americans from Bulloch County and those families that left Bulloch County as part of the Great Migration. Currently, we have 20,000 funeral programs in our collection, of which 6,000 are digitized. And if anyone has done digitization work, you know it's one program at a time. And so this actually started, we've really benefited from our partnership with Georgia Southern as a non-thesis master's student project, and her name was Sarah Napier in 2016. So I actually have some pictures. These are, we're standing at Willow Hill in front of the marker, and these are students who came to Willow Hill to do scanning parties. And so this is a larger picture in front of our museum, and right in the center is Sarah Napier. Okay, so each funeral program is housed in a plastic sleeve, and we have about 136 notebooks. And so the students actually took the notebooks, and we had scanners on tables, and it was actually a lot of fun. This is our Digital Commons launch page. So if you go, you will see that we have a logo. And if you actually go to the launch page on the side, you can see that we have 2 digital collections. It's the African American Funeral Programs Collection, and then another collection called If These Cemeteries Could Talk, which is the tours that we do of the 38 known African American cemeteries in Bulloch County. We have had lots of interns, and so it started out with Sarah Napier in 2016, and so after she left in 2017, the project was sort of dormant. But then the pandemic came, which actually helped this collection because the university was looking for projects that could be done remotely, and this is one such project. And so what happens is that we meet by Zoom. Each person who works on the collection gets a folder with scanned documents, and then they upload those and add keywords to Digital Commons. So it was kind of perfect for us that we were able to get students to work during the pandemic, and then we would meet remotely. This is one of our favorite places to look on our collection. So one of the things that is sort of to our advantage working with Digital Commons and its association with the university is that we get a lot of data. And so if you look at this, there was a reader from Eastern Ghana. I don't know why that's always fascinating for us. So currently, this is a couple of weeks ago, 6,066 digitized funeral programs, 34,000 downloads, 14,000 downloads this year, and so far about 135 countries have accessed our records. Recently, we were very fortunate to get a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences so that we could actually create an internship program where we can pay interns to do some of the digitization work. And that's needed. You know, it's great to have a student volunteer, but we had high turnover rates and we didn't have consistency with the work. And so now we have a 2-year grant that will allow us to not just digitize, but also look at quality of the collection. So that's one of the things that we're working on now. All right, so I wanted to kind of show you some of the funeral programs that we have in the collection. The earliest programs date back into the 1940s, and that's consistent with the trends in the community. So a rural community, Bulloch County is mostly rural. Prior to the 1940s, most of the deaths were recorded in church minutes. Then you start to, and this kind of coincides with, in the 1920s, some of the first funeral homes for African Americans sort of arrived in Bulloch County. And so during the funeral services, there would be a program, but the program would be mostly read. Okay, so this is a program from 1947, and it was in Bulloch County, and you can see it's, you know, fairly plain. If we look on the inside, you have the program, but the obituary was still being read, so you don't have any of the information actually in the program. This is another image, and I'll kind of zoom this up, where you can kind of see that it's a one-page program. So this is something that was mostly read, but you start to have these early documents still very plain. And now this is a very interesting one. I don't know if you remember the story of the family that left Bulloch County in the 1920s very quickly. Well, this is that family here. Okay, so you can see that this is William Parrish, who descended from one of the founders of the Willow Hill community, Moses Parrish. And you can see here that this is in Glendale, Ohio. And I'm going to back out here. The other interesting thing that we see on the funeral program sometimes is writing. And so here someone's trying to calculate how long he was married, how old he was. There's notes here, 2 sons died in infancy. But now you see, so this program, you can actually start seeing that the obituary is, you know, the history is here. Okay, and so you can kind of see the transition in some of the funeral programs. So this is one of those great migration stories that we have in the collection. Now, this is a program from 2023. Look at the changes. You can see the color. What is this? This is a QR code. And, you know, so that's the kind of the difference with some of these newer programs is that there are a lot more pictures, a lot more color. You know, funeral homes now are live streaming, so this QR code was the link that the individuals could use to get to the live stream. Now, this is a very interesting story. So part of what we do is we combine what's in our collection with the tours of the cemetery. So our cemetery tours are titled If These Cemeteries Can Talk. And so a recent tour, March 16, 2024, was at the New Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church in Register, Georgia. And during that tour, some of the members of the community told a very interesting story about a woman named Margie Hendricks, who was a great singer. But she was buried intentionally in an unmarked grave. And so that was interesting to me. One other tidbit was that she sang with Ray Charles. Okay, so what do you do when you get little tidbits? You do a Google search. Okay, so I did a Google search. So it says Marjorie Hendricks. She was actually one of the founding members of the Raylettes. If anybody remembers that movie Ray, Regina King played her. So she actually moved to New York following her sister at age 18. So that's a kind of a great migration story. Rose to prominence, but also had tragically died very young with alcohol and substance abuse. And she actually had a child with Ray Charles. Okay? And so sometimes when I do a Google search, I like to do an image search where I look for images. And surprising to us, what did we find? That's our record. I didn't even know we had this record. So let's look closely. So this is her funeral program. That's part of our collection that I found doing a Google search. And so we're still learning a lot about our collection. What's very interesting about this funeral program, so you can see now there's a picture on the front, there's an order of service, there's her history. What's interesting is what's not in the program. So there isn't any reference to Ray Charles. There isn't any reference to her history of singing, because she was in the Cookies and the Raylettes. There isn't any reference to her son. So, we've been trying to figure out why that was, but we think, coming from a small town and a religious community, it was just not something that was talked about.
That devil's music.
That's right. That's what it was.
Put that in with the old sisters.
All right, so, thank you for allowing us just to share a little bit about what we do in our funeral programs collection. If you want to know more about us, this is our website, www.willowhillheritage.org. The best way to reach us is just to send us an email. And then, of course, on April 27th, come and join us for a Taste of Struggle. Okay. Oh, Amari.
Good to see you. Amari has worked with us. She now works at, what's that museum she works at?
She's at Telfair.
Telfair Museum.
And she's a direct descendant of the first teacher of the Willow Hill School, Georgietta Riggs.
Yes, and she worked with us. And we don't keep anybody from moving on up.
and we also have Miss LaPortia Mosley, who's
Miss
worked with
related to the school founders. And
now I'm with the Georgia Historical Society.
oh, beautiful. That's our great-great-great-grandfather who was on the farm when the school was founded in 1874. So it's good to see all of that connectivity here and to see the Riggs family from Statesboro. So good to see all of you and the history that you bring. So thank you so much for coming. Thank all of you for coming. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I don't know how much time we got. But yes.
I don't have a question, but this was so interesting. You're a great speaker.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, ma'am.
I have one question. Do you know where on the Ogeechee River they used to camp when they came from Statesboro to Savannah every year? And the reason I ask that is because in Savannah we have the group associated with the Ogeechee, Savannah Ogeechee Canal Society.
I used to know where the campsite was, and I'm assuming it's still there, but you would pick it up on Highway 80 because 16 did not exist at that time. And so you'd come down Highway 80, and it was a huge campsite, and then they would cross the Ogeechee River to come to Savannah. And the Ogeechee River has great importance because Bulloch County, between the Canoochee and Ogeechee, and a lot of the early African Americans and the early white settlers settled on the Ogeechee. Those that found Neville's Creek in 1790, before Bulloch County was even founded as the first Primitive Baptist church, and also the Methodist church was founded in 1790. All of that was along the river. And so the river, my grandfather used to always talk about the river and the activities they had on the Geechee River. They would go fishing, and then they have a huge picnic down at the river where all the ladies would come. And so that was part of the social development in those early years, those times of horse and buggy. Yes?
Yes, I am a history buff as well, and I have been looking at my family's history, and I am just floored by the amount of information that you guys have here. This is tremendous, and I love it. And I'm wanting to ask questions about. I can go back to my my mother's grandfather, born in 1870 something. Mm-hmm. But I want to go back further. So I don't know how you guys did that, but I would love to know. I know the funeral programs and that is a great source of information, but I'd like to go back for mine as well.
One of the advantages we had was that we came from a community of storytellers. They would sit around and talk, and these stories would be transferred. I have stories that I was told that happened during the days of slavery and how things were. And so when I started hearing those stories years ago, 40, 50 years ago, I started recording. I first started writing it down, and then I go back to the literature to see if I can find anything to validate what is said. And so the other thing that's important right now is that DNA. If you write this down, you'll find a very interesting story about our family called Harriet Riggs, the matriarch. Now that's a very, very important story because it puts a lot of things together using DNA. Because Harriet Riggs' father was a white man, and her sister owned her as a slave, and her sister had married Robert Donaldson, who was a primitive Baptist minister who came over from Ireland in the 1770s as a little boy with his father John. They was in North Carolina, then they migrated down to Georgia. They was in Georgia for, the county was founded in 1796. So in that, we find all of these white families that are actually connected to our family. I have one side of my family is very mulatto. But if you go on the side of my grandfather at Jonas Lee, you saw those are very dark-skinned people. So you get both, and then you get the stories. And even years later, in fact, when I leave here, I've got a service to go to on the love side of the family. Those are a lot of the mulatto people that came through. So we had that advantage. People collected. So when anybody dies, I try to go and see what they have. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of stuff still there. The other thing, at the Bulloch County Courthouse, I found a record because I did these oral recordings, and my uncle, who was born in 1908, told me that his grandfather, Washington Hodge, that I show you there, that married one of the Rick girls, had 3 brothers that left with the Yankees. And I was always fascinated by that story. So when Sherman left Atlanta in 1864, coming to Savannah, Georgia, he camped at the Neville's Creek Primitive Baptist Church, the one that was founded in 1790. That was near where the Hodges and all of those family members of mine were living. So many African Americans self-liberated themselves and followed Sherman. And they followed them, and you want to get this story, into Effingham County. The young people made the way for all the wagons and all of that. They built a platoon bridge to cross Ebenezer Creek. The Confederate Army was chasing them. So what did they do? Somebody took up the bridge. Abraham Lincoln was president, and all men, women, and children drowned in Ebenezer Creek. It's called the tragedy of Ebenezer Creek. Such a political story that Abraham Lincoln sent his Secretary of War, Stanton, to Savannah, Georgia, to try to solve this political disaster. So they met in Second Baptist Church, I think it's second or first, and they met at that church to come up with a solution. And the solution they came up with was 40 acres and a mule. That's where that story comes from. And so, yes, sir.
Just one correction. They
Yes, sir.
met at the Green Meldrum House.
At the Green Melvin House, okay.
The proclamation was read at the second.
At the church,
at the
but they met to get that. Thank you for that, because we have a sort of an exhibit. I got to do a little correction on the exhibit down there because someone from here had done that. But that's the story of the 40 acres and a mule.
Yeah.
And so Lincoln was assassinated. Andrew Johnson became president and rescinded that order. So those individuals who had it lost, and that was supposed to be land from near Charleston, South Carolina, past Savannah, all the way down to the St. Johns River in Florida. It was supposed to be carved out into sections. So a lot of us have heard about that 40 acres and a mule, but we don't make the connection. And 3 of my relatives were with Sherman's group when they crossed Ebenezer Creek, and they let us later settle in Coahoma County, Mississippi. So when I was at the courthouse, I was looking for records, and I found records where my great-great-grandfather, Elder Washington Hodge, was over the estate, and he went over to Mississippi by train and carried their estate to them that they had after their mother died in 1910. She lived to be almost 100 years old. In 1872 is when their dad died. He's the first one buried up at Hodges Cemetery in Bulloch County. And so she lived, and then after her death, then they divided the estate. And he went over and found those that had been. And one last point I want to make is, I'm sorry about that. One last point I want to make is, during slavery time, in our family, there are 3 different names, but they're all of brothers. Somebody was, the Halls that we talked about, they were actually brothers that was sold to Nathaniel Hall, who was a slave owner. So that one took the Hall's name. And then Nathaniel Hall died, and his wife, Sarah, married a Brandon. And then 3 of them took the Brandon name. And then the others had the Hodges name, but they were all brothers. And you wouldn't know that if you didn't have this old folk from way back to tell you about this stuff. And so I recorded it. So that's one reason how we know that. Yes?
This is Dr. Teresa Middleton.
Doctor. You related to James Middleton?
I am not.
Okay. I want to know, he taught at Willow Hill School. He was hard on the guys. Lord, we just said he had that old boy, we get to the girls, get him a tap. Get him a little tap. Get him a pow! So I wanted to know if he was related.
No.
All right, yes.
I just have
From
a
South Carolina.
I want to say that I remember a while back when we were all part of the IMLS program
Yes.
with Jeannie Syriac.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to say, I'm just blown away how far you've come. When we were sitting around that table trying to get all
Yes.
those things started.
Yes.
The other thing I want to say is, like, I am so impressed with your family because I come from a family, nobody said anything about anything. I'm just jealous of all these things. Because we're all sitting around now saying, what happened with this? How much do you remember?
Yeah.
And-
Well, actually, the young people weren't supposed to be around old folks.
That's right.
So if they recognize that you were awake or something, they say, go play boy.
Oh, I know.
So you had to pretend to be asleep, you know? You had to know how to play possum real good. And I was an expert at doing possum.
That's why
I
I got
can
in
tell
trouble.
you that occurred in white families too.
Yeah.
They did not want the kids around, so you
Yeah.
had to be extremely still and extremely quiet if you wanted to hear anything.
Well, thank y'all so much. We appreciate y'all all coming.
I want to thank Dr. Jackson and Dr. Jackson Flowers so much for coming. And he mentioned storytellers, and while he was talking, I was thinking he's such a great storyteller, and then I was like, no, you're a great history teller. So I think that's important.
Definitely.
I'm going to very, very quickly give you 2 updates on work that we've been doing. I want to recognize Megan Karkoff, who's sitting in the corner. She's one of our archivists and our records management coordinator here at the city, and she worked hard on the WW Law collection. And we were directly inspired by one of the articles talking about Willow Hill's funeral program digitization project. And Megan's like, we've got lots of funeral programs in the WW Law collection. So she's been working, started last year, identifying the funeral programs we have over our collections, not just the WW Law collection, but we have funeral programs in our government collections for employees and former mayors. She has digitized over 400 programs. This is a snapshot of her metadata spreadsheet. So right now she's indexing it and capturing the information. And she's working with the Digital Library of Georgia so that we can share our funeral program collection as well through their portal. And Digital Library of Georgia, if you're not familiar, it's a great resource. It helps to pull in information across from many repositories, and they also connect to the Digital Public Library of America. So it makes us, our resources very accessible on a national and international level, as you saw with our East Ghana researcher. So look for that coming out. There is a brochure about that project on the cart over there by the door. And if you have a program for anybody, we're not necessarily, doesn't just have to be African American, anybody from Savannah or Chatham County, we would love to include it. So you can email or mail us a copy of a program you would like included. So take that brochure, it's got information. The second project I just want to give a quick update is the Springfield Terrace School, also known as the Pearl Lee Smith School. This school was built in 1926 specifically for the African American children around the Springfield Terrace area. Carver Village was built nearby in the 1940s. It was renamed for Pearl Lee Smith in the 1950s because she was instrumental in raising the funds to get that school built, convincing the Board of Education it was needed, and also helping to secure the land donation. In 2012, it stopped being used as a school and it reverted to the city because we had been involved with the property donation in the first place. So the city has owned this school since 2012, but it's been vacant. So it needs a lot of help. We've been slowly working on its restoration. In 2022, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We leveraged that to get a National Park Service grant, which we're going to use towards a buildings condition assessment, rehab plan, and then the architectural designs. Why I want to talk about it today is we are in the middle of engaging with the public to get feedback on what kind of programming and activities they want to see in this building. So we have a survey, which is very short. There's a paper version if you'd like to fill it out before you leave, or you can go onto savannahga.gov/school survey. That's also a QR code that gets you there. We're taking responses through this Sunday. So I would encourage anybody who has went to Pearl Lee Smith, knows somebody, or has an interest in the future of that building for our community, participate in that survey. We're going to have a second public engagement process this summer. We're going to do a community memory event, and we're hoping to connect not just with former alumni, but our former teachers and people who lived in the neighborhood so we can start documenting better the history of the school so that we can use that as part of the project going forward as well. So there is an info sheet and the survey also on the cart over there, and I would ask all of you to participate in the survey and spread the word about what we're doing with this school, because we want to make sure this whatever happens with this school reflects what the community would like to see there. So with that, I'm going to close. If anybody has questions about either of our projects, I'm happy Megan and I can answer them. But otherwise, we're so glad you guys came, and so glad to the Jacksons for coming as well. Thank you.